Hello and welcome to week 12, day 55 of the fall 2025 Web Development Technologies course. This is Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So, believe it or not, we're already at week 12. It's November the 10th, and we only have a little bit over a month left to go. The last day of the class will be December 14th, so just a little bit over a month to go. So we've made a lot of progress in a short amount of time here. Right now, after the end of this week, you'll be 75% finished with this course, and just keep on pushing. Before you know it, it's going to be wrapping things up. Wanted to mention on Tuesday's a Veterans Day holiday, so I won't have a live session, and I'll just go ahead and record. I was going to try to do both these chapters in this one session, but I'm going to split it up into two different ones. So today we're just going to cover chapter 6, and I'll go ahead and record a separate video for chapter 7. So today we're going to go over enhancing and validating forms. We're going to go over the form element interaction, data formatting, different form events, client-side validation, custom validations, and also advanced checks as well. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So I'm going to go through this, one of these guides that I made, one of these JavaScript guides I made. And so I'll go ahead and I'm going to go through that. But I also have another interactive form where, we can actually enter data in and look at things within the browser console within the Chrome developer tools. And also we can look at the code in Visual Studio Code as well. So web forms are a primary way to interact with websites by entering data. JavaScript makes forms more powerful by adding validation, dynamic calculations, and enhanced user experience. Good form handling is essential for e-commerce, registration, surveys, and any user input. So why form enhancement matters? Better UX. UX stands for user experience. So it provides instant feedback to users. Data quality. It catches errors before submission. You always have to, you always really should be validating your data because users enter all kinds of crazy stuff in there, okay? They'll enter the wrong characters, special characters. They put a lot of unusual things in there, right? The more people you have that enter data into the fields, the more likelihood that somebody's going to be doing something that's incorrect. And if you're not validating those different fields, they will get errors. Security. By validating input, it helps prevent malicious data. There's hackers out there and different programs that try to inject code into websites to try to gain access to back-end servers and so forth. So by validating your data, it helps with that security. And you should kind of validate data. I know this course is about front-end technologies, but besides just front end, you really should validate your data both on the front end and on the back end, because sometimes you can actually turn JavaScript off. Most of the modern websites now, if you turn JavaScript off, it really won't work. But there are some people that have it turned off, and if it's possible that some way you could get through and actually try to get to that back end without the JavaScript enabled. So always try to validate your input both on the front end and on your back end. Okay. And using some enhanced form validation, it calculates some values automatically, makes things a little more efficient. You can calculate some things or do some things on that front end to make things, using JavaScript, so you can get some things done that way, and it's much more of a convenience for the users. Referencing forms and elements. So before you can work with form data, you need to reference the form and its elements. So all forms on a page are stored in the document.forms collection. Okay. So to access, let's say, some pages might have multiple forms. Some pages will only have one form. In most cases, I think you're going to see one form, but there's times that there are pages that have multiple forms on it. So to access the first form, and if it's the only form, by doing document.forms with a subscript of 0, that will access the very first form, okay, or the only form if that's the only form. So this now will be that form, okay. This will reference, this variable will now point to that form and everything in it, right? Another way to access a form is using a name attribute. Okay, you still do the .forms, but instead of using the subscript 0 here, you do the name of the form. Okay, you do the name of the form. And remember, that's by name attribute. Okay, it's by name attribute. That's not an ID. Okay, when you access it this way, that needs to be the name of the form. Okay, the other way is by using get element by ID. And then obviously here's your order form, and this is going to be the ID, not the name. Okay, so always remember when you access, if you're planning on accessing it using document.forms, and okay, you need to give it a name, the name attribute. If you're going to do it obviously by get element by ID, this needs to be the HTML ID. Okay. Referencing form elements. So right here is an example of basically getting access to a form by using get element by ID. So now this variable holds on to that form, and to get the different now there's different ways to obviously get different elements of that form. Okay. And remember, forms always return elements, okay? Forms hold on to all your different form controls on there are elements, okay? If you got input type text, you got a text field, that's going to be an element. If you got a button, that's going to be an element, okay? Now, if in your form you've got other things like div tags and stuff like that, them are not considered form elements, okay? Them are just other, usually that's other HTML that's just embedded maybe within your form, but that's not the actual, them are not actual form elements itself, right? So remember, the form elements are like the input tags, the buttons, etc., right? So to access a, say a name field, an ID. So let's say you have a text box with a called name. You can access that by doing get element by ID, right? And here's another way through the forms element collection. So if you do the form dot elements, okay, customer name, that will get you the customer name back, okay? And then there's another way using a query selector. You do form query selector, right? And here, remember, we kind of did this before. The pound sign's always going to be an ID, right? If you do a dot here for query selector, that's going to be the class name, right? And in this case, you're using query selector and getting this name by using the hash name, right? Which is the ID. Let's look at a little bit of code and something a little more interactive to kind of help you out here a little bit. So I'm going to, let's first look at some code, a little bit of code in Visual Studio Code here. So like what I was saying here, let me scroll down a little bit, got some styling here. So here's a form called basic form. Okay. And this basic form has both an ID and a name, right? And we showed how you can access a form by ID, right? Or you can access it by name. So remember that there's two different ways, well, basically like almost three different ways to access it, but you can access it by ID, you can access it by name, right? And so we'll look at some examples on that. Um, then for this form, you've got different elements. What elements you have? Really, your divs is not an element. It's not a form element, right? It's not a form control. Your form control is your input button. There's a form control. There's another form control, right? And a button is also a form control, okay? So in this case, for this form, okay, you've got 1, 2, 3 elements. So let's go ahead and look at a little bit of code here. Not code, but let's look on here and let's actually, I do want you to get used to use developer tools. It's very helpful. So here you've got this is the basic form element here. Okay. So if I do, let me grab something here real quick. Okay. So here, so the name of this form, and actually when I put this in here, you can see it kind of highlights this kind of, it's a good tool to really get used to using these developer tools. I know I've mentioned this multiple times, but it can really be beneficial for debugging purposes and things like that. So here is basically your form right here. This is called the basic form in the code, right? And once you do that, here's your basic form, and this is basically this whole form, right? So you see some within this form, you got a couple divs and buttons and so forth, right? Or well, a button, a div, and within these divs, you got your input elements and so forth, right? Okay. So this form, everything within this form is part of the form, but they're like I said, these divs are not really form. They're not form controls. They're not elements. Okay. So but this way here, like we said, when you access a form this way, basic form, when you do this dot forms, this has got to be the name of the form. You can't, this won't access it by ID, right? If you want to access it by ID, then you would have to do something like this, right? Then you would do something like this, and it's going to return the same form, right? It's going to return the same form. But this is getting it by ID, this is getting it by name, right? And then the other one was basically doing this here, right? Since this example here has multiple forms, this example, this HTML example has multiple forms. So this one, we're going to get the very first one, and this is going to be the same form. So this is the 3 different ways to get that basic form. One is using the name. The second one's by ID. And the third one is just by using the basically the array, the subscript 0. This is the first form, right? It's probably best either to do this one, the forms, or get element by ID, because this one can maybe a little bit confusing if you're looking at the code. Especially you got to think when you code, you might write some code where you work somewhere, and then someone else comes along later on. They're going to pick up, you wrote the code. They have to pick it up and look at it and figure it out. Well, when you basically use more descriptive names like basic form, so okay, I'm getting this basic form. If you have multiple forms on that page, right, as opposed to just form at 0, it's just a little more descriptive and a little easier for reading purposes. So the next thing I wanted to do is look at the elements on this form, right? So let's look at what elements are on this form. Okay, so let's get the form, and then we can do dot elements. And by doing that, this will return the elements on the form. So as you can see, this says 3. This means there's 3 different elements on that form. Okay, and if you remember, we looked at that form, we seen some div tags, and then we seen a couple of text fields, and we seen a button, right? But it's saying 3, that's because even though the div tag and them are not elements, right? The div tags are just basically HTML elements. They're not form elements, right? So you only have three form elements. Is you have an input type of with a ID of first name, you have another input field of last name, and then you have a button, right? So them are the three elements that you have on that form. Now, if you want to get a value, so let's say you want to get, let's put a value, let's put something in here. Okay, and I'm just going to blur to the other thing. And now if I go ahead and get, I can get element by ID, right? There's different ways to do this as well. So there's this field has a ID of first name. So basically by doing that, and just always remember, this is going to get you the complete control, right? This is going to get you that form control, the whole text box, right? It's not going to get you the value. If you want the value, right, then you're going to have to do dot value. And there's Jim, right? Another way to also do this, so if we get back to, let's do this again. Let's get the form. And then from there, I'm going to do, dot elements. Okay, and I'm going to do dot elements. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and do, and so that, and once again, you have to do value, right, to get the value. So same thing there, right? Now, obviously, a lot of times you might have a form name where you put a variable equal to this, and then it's, you can do it in multiple. That way, you're not necessarily doing all in one line, but I'm just kind of showing you that. So basically, you're getting an element by ID, you're getting a form, right? Then you're doing the dot elements, and then you're using this name there, right? And then you're getting the value. So this is one way to do it. This was the other one because the name of this text box, the ID of this text box was first name. And since the ID of the text box was first name, you can get the value that way as well. Okay. All right. Okay, just to recap here, I guess, a little bit. So we're printing out some things in this demo. So the form accessed by name. So this can access it by name. We just looked at that. Basic form, or you can get the element by ID, right? The first name value was Jim. Last name value was empty. I didn't put anything in there, so nothing's in there. The form has three elements, like we talked about. The divs and all that other stuff that might be within that form are not considered elements, right? Only the controls and buttons, right? Controls. All right, next one is the blur thing here. So and a lot of times for focus, it's kind of common. Sometimes you're wanting, when you come into a new page, you want to put focus in the first field. Okay, so you can write your code so you put focus in that very first field, and that's what it's doing here. Okay, down here, this is just an example of the same thing, focus and blur. So by clicking focus here, it's actually going to put focus in here, right? Here is blur, and blur is basically moving focus out of there, right? It's moving focus out of there. So that puts focus in the field. Blur moves focus out of the field. So to do that with code real quick here. So first I want to go to a spot where I don't have focus in this field, because I'm just a little different when you're using the console, because console, when you start putting things in the console, your focus is basically in the console, but I'm going to kind of show you that it's kind of still working. So like I'm going to go all the way down to farther in here in this form. And then when I go ahead and on that focus demo on that part, that field, if I go ahead and do dot focus like that, right, it's actually going to, and I hit enter, actually, the reason it isn't putting focus in there, but it actually did execute this. It's just because the reason it didn't put it in here is because we're using the console, so focus is automatically in here. So just kind of showing you that. So if you ever try to do something within the console for those focus and blur type events, then you're not going to see that, right? But the other one is, besides focus, was the blur, right? And this ain't going to make a difference here. Let's see. It helps if I spell it right. And you know, once it has, it's not going to make a difference because it's going to put focus on here. But that's what this basically, this is what this button do. It's called the dot blur, just like this. So dot blur is going to remove focus. That adds focus. Okay. Let's look at this one, working with selection list. Let me get back to that guide here real quick though. See where we're at here. Okay, so we kind of looked at the form element. We did all of that. Okay, let me go through this. So, you know, we got the value, right? So there's different things you can get. We do dot value, open and close parentheses to get the value. But if you want to set a value, right? So yeah, let's just do that real quick. Let's do that. Let's go back and do that real quick. I want to make sure. So we had this here. Let me refresh this. And then we put Jim in here, right? And then let me go back here a little bit. So we're doing that one. So that will get you your value. I said open and close parentheses, but no, just not value, right? But you can do this. Okay, let me do that. And as you can see, I hit enter. It actually is going to take, and you can see it changed over here to Joe. So I got the first name dot value, right? And I'm setting the value on this ID based on this ID. Well, based on this elements, we're using this element based on this form with this element name. I'm setting it to Joe, and that's what happened right here. So that's a sets of value. And then here, you know, basically input type, you know, you're not going to dynamically change an input type, but you may want to get, you know, you may be looping through some big form and say, I want to get all the form elements that are of type text, right? Or all of the check boxes. So there are some use cases where you're going to want to do that, okay? You can get it based on type, right? And then also, there's a name attribute, right? We know that. There's a field value. There's a field name as well, right? And then here's also showing you can do disabled equals true. Let's go take a look at that real quick. Let's give that a try as well here. So here I'm going to do, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to do, so for the first name one here, I don't know how this is going to look here, but hopefully you'll be able to see it's disabled. Okay. As you can see, I'm hoping you can see that. It kind of turned that all gray color now. So this, see, I can't, If I click in here, I can't put anything in here. I can't hear because it's now disabled, right? So there's times, sometimes you might want, there might be situations where you're going to enter data based on some stuff. You may disable or enable stuff. You might have some stuff that's disabled on your form, but if they check a certain checkbox or a radio button, then you might want to enable other things, right? So if you all of a sudden, if you want to enable it, you just set disable to false here, right? And now it's disabled. All right. And we'll look at checkboxes too. Checkbox.checked equals true. So you can also do that. Sometimes there may be situations where you're going to want to, especially when you're reading data into a page. You know, most of what we do is a lot of client-side stuff, but when you're building pages from some data that's coming in, you know, you might be looping through that data, and based on that data, you're making decisions. Okay, we need to check this box, or we need to, you know, put this value in these fields, right? So this is how you could check a box if you want to do, you know, by doing checkbox.checked equals true. Okay, we looked at focus and blur a little bit there already. So let's look at a selection list. So basically a select box, right? So the select box is where you've got different options, right? And so how do you get an option? You can get it based on, here you're getting you're getting the whole select statement by getting it by ID of country, okay? If someone selected one of them, you can get it by using the selected index, just like this, right? Just like that. So let's take a look at that. Okay. So that was on blur. We're going to skip. Where's the country one? I'm going to skip down to that one, I think. Thought that was on here. Maybe it's not. Okay, I was wrong about that one. All right, that's all right. Let's look at this one. Oh no, it is here. Duh. So here you've got a choose a country, right? So you got United States, Canada, and so the select is actually taking up, even though it just says select. This is going to be at position 0. United States is position 1, right? And I'm going to just select these so you can see. If I do this, show it. Please select a country first. So selected index is 1. So actually, this one here is just kind of a placeholder, but it's actually at position 0. So keep that in mind. So basically at United States is at position 1, right? It's got a value in it, right? So maybe we should look at the code a little bit. That might help out as well. Go down to that. So all right. That's the radio buttons. Show multiple selections. So here's the, you're getting the country list by getting the element by ID country. And then you get getting the index of the one that's actually selected. Country list dot selected index. That's the one selected. Okay. If we looked at the HTML real quick here. So this is the value that we've seen that it was returning there, right? This is the value. This is just the text within here. This is kind of inner text, right? This is the value of that. So when usually when you're dealing with forms, you're actually going to be submitting these, right, to some back-end server somewhere, right? So when you submit the data for country, it's going to send a value of US or California, Canada, Mexico, or UK, but it's going to use these value Okay, it's going to use what's in this value field. All right, let's go back down here for a minute. Okay, so first I'm going to go ahead and get this field, right? And it's the ID of that field is country. So I believe, yep, it is correct. So obviously you look here, here's your option values, right? Your different option values there. Now if I get the, so I have that, I can now do country list dot selected index. Okay, if I do country dot selected index, so right now you'll see that it's a 0, right? Because nothing, well, the selected index is this 1 here, right? If I change this to 1 now, okay, and I run that again, now you notice it's a 1, right? If I change this to Canada, it's going to be a 2 now, right? If I want to get the value, so obviously see what happened when I just put this in here. So it's showing all 5 options, right? But I want to get the value of the first one. Well, actually, the second one, the first one is just that select. So the first one would be United States. So if I do that dot value, returns US. Oh, and then if I want to do, and if I want to get the, so the text like this here, the United States, Canada, Mexico, all of these different ones, right? So if I want to get that, let's just get the, third one in the list now. And we're going to do TEXT here instead. And it's going to actually return that inner HTML, the inner text, right? Mexico, basically this right here, right? Not this returns the value. This is going to return the text of that option, right? Of that option. Okay. Now let's go and look at the multi. Went a little too far there. It's the multi one here. First, let me go back to that guide to make sure I didn't miss too much stuff. Okay. So we've seen the selected index, right? It's going to be 0 based. Also options. You just do options. It's going to, that's the collection of all options that are available. Obviously, if you do a subscript on that, right, with the brackets and put a number in it, it's going to get that specific option. If you just put options in there itself, it's going to return that collection of options. Also, you can do a dot length. Dot length, it'll give you the number of options. And then we also seen value, and we've seen text as well, right? We use text on that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at a multiple selection list. So for this multiple selection list, basically a select still, right? But what you're doing here is you have multiple, right? Here we're setting the size to 4. Obviously, you can set the size to less, and then it would end up scrolling and stuff to get to more. Here we're setting the size to the full amount, which is 4. The ID, both the ID and the name is the same, right? Obviously, different ways to access this by ID or name that we've kind of already discussed earlier. But this one here, the select, you can get it by ID. Simplest way, I guess. And so let's go ahead and do that. Here, well, let me go look at the HTML here on this one. Not the oh, sorry, that didn't do what I thought it was going to do. Let me just scroll down here. All right. So in the code, it's kind of looping through. So kind of different ways to get to your different options there within the selected boxes, right? So here you're going through, you're getting your whole list. You're looping through this options. You're doing options.length. You're looping through this, all right? Then you're basically saying you're checking to see if the option in that list has been selected, right? The selected will be either true or false, right? It's going to be either true or false depending on if you selected or not, all right? Then we're just we've created, there's a array here we defined, and we're pushing that option to that array just so we can print that out, right? Just so we can print that out. So to, you know, check to see if something's selected is one way to do it, by looping through the option list, and then, you know, having another array where you can go ahead and push the values of the selected items to it, right? And you always need to check to see if it's been selected or not. Here you're getting text, right? Remember we looked at that just a minute ago, getting text as opposed to value, right? Two different options on that. All right. So let's look at that real quick. So in this case, selected two options, one pepperoni, one olives. So that's what that code does. I did want to show you something else. So if, just for your own purposes, because you might want to check to see if something's been selected or not, just a quick way to check to see if something's been selected, and a quick way to do that. So if you do the selected index, obviously it's going to tell you which one, right? So if I do all of those, what's this going to do here on this? That's interesting. Okay, but if I just choose one of these, let's see what happens there. I need to move out of here. That helps. So that was the first one. What if I got two here? What happens there? It's just going to, yeah, so selected index is always going to bring back the very first one that's actually been selected. You got multiple. Now, for some reason, that's why you kind of got to really loop through. When we looked at that for statement where we loop through to get them all, okay? Another thing to keep in mind is if you don't have anything selected, it will return a -1, a -1. So that's very helpful. A lot of developers use that because there's different things within programming. Returns -1. It's a good thing to check for to see if it returns -1 means it basically doesn't have a value, right? Wouldn't be 0 because 0 everything's always indexed. We're starting at 0, right? So a selected index of returning a 0, you know, it's not meaning none. It means the first one, right? So you know you got to kind of watch that. So whenever you want to check to see if something return is, you know, anything that's 0 based, you check it. If it's -1, that means it doesn't exist, right? Nothing's been selected. Okay. All right. So that was a multiple selection list. And always remember, to make it a multiple selection list, you need to define that as being a multiple select by having multiple in there, right? Working with radio buttons. Now, radio buttons, just kind of review, we kind of looked through these. I know we did this back towards the HTML. We did a little bit of stuff, with forms and that. So you have a little bit of experience already with forms. For a radio button, remember, radio buttons always, you're only choosing one, right? You're not choosing multiple. If you're wanting something where you're choosing multiple, you want to really use checkboxes. Radio buttons are really set up to be within a group, right? And kind of to group it, basically, it's very easy to group it. All you need to do is call it the same name, right? Like here, it's size, right? And this is what's going to end up getting sent to the back end, right? This is what's going to get sent via URL. Remember when we used to look at GET requests where it shows the values? If you do a post, it still gets sent, but you can't really see it within the URL browser window, right? Up here at the browser window. But if you do a GET, you can actually see what's being sent, right? And for all form elements, it's always a name and a value, right? So if you select it, the very first radio button, it's going to send size equals small. If you select the second one, it's going to be size equal medium, right? But you're always really choosing one radio button, right? And here's the easy way just to get the array of buttons. And so here's just basically doing a loop through, seeing if a radio button is checked, right? Is checked. You don't have to see if checked equals true. It's just basically, this is going to return a true or false, right? This is going to return true or false by itself. You don't have to say checked equals true, just dot checked. If it's checked, then you're basically setting this value here for the selected one, and you're breaking out of this loop, right? So this is one method to get that, okay? There is another method, okay? The other method is using a query selector. And so that you can just get the input.size and look for the checked ones, and it's going to return which one was checked, okay? So we'll look at both of those. And then here's also getting the button, or not getting a label, all right? Getting a label is interesting. You're getting the closest label, all right? So that's kind of how it does this. It looks for the closest label to that button. Okay, let's look at a little bit in the console here. So here's our little radio buttons. So here, just by doing get element by ID dot size, right? This is going to be a node list. It returns a node list of 4 items. Okay, I'm going to hit enter here and put 0, 1, 2, 3. Right? It's going to, all the different stuff. It'll have values. If you scroll down and look for that on each one of them, you'll be able to find the values as well. Okay. And like I said, for radio buttons, like if you click it, right? It's only going to select one. It's not going to select multiple. And that's because you used the name size. It uses the same name. Let's just, for the fun here, let's see what happens when let's go down to our size one. Radio buttons. Oh, got to look at the HTML. Sorry, got to get the HTML here for that. That's our pizzas. Where's our radio buttons? Radio. Nope. We're still looking at the JavaScript. Let me get up here. All right. All right. Here's checkboxes. radio buttons. So here you got size. They're all the same name, right? They're all the same name. So it's just going to, whatever one's selected, and if you check, it'll have the value for that one. So just for fun here, let's just change the name of this one to size 2 here. So I'm just kind of wanting to show what happens if you don't have them the same name here, okay? So let's go back to our, I have auto save, so it should have automatically updated that. So if I go down here to radio buttons now, I get a little too happy with the scrolling. So if I select small, okay, then I select medium, right? And I select large, right? Them are all have small. This one I put size 2 or something. I just put a different name, right? Doesn't matter what you called it, but it's a different name than these 3. So if I select this, basically this one and this one will both now be selected, right? So is there some cases you want to do this? You know, maybe, but in most cases you don't want to do this, right? These are, you know, you just choose one size, right? So that's why you have to make sure that name is the same for all of them, right? Let me put that back here. So here's your different values. Small through extra large. Nothing. And this is showing you the query selector. So you can use this query selector as well, right? So this is just a different way to do that. Either you loop through them to find out which one's been selected, or you can do this query selector and basically just exactly like it is written here. Input name equals size. You see if it's checked, you get the value, and it will return which one is checked. Okay, it's returning the value of the one that's checked. Okay, check boxes. So check boxes are different because you select multiple ones, right? This is where you select multiple ones, right? So let's look at that code here. So this is different interest. You got sports, music, reading, right? Notice the name. The name's the same. Okay, so here, even though for checkboxes you can have the same name, right? You can have the same name. You can have the same name, but you can select multiple ones, right? And then here, yeah. What if I do something? I'm going to try something real quick. So I'm going to real quick wrap this in a form. So I want to look at this. So we're going to form.get. I think we're going to have to put a submit button in there too for this to work. Let's get back to our code here real quick. Okay, even though it doesn't display right. Okay, that's all right. So I want to click these and hit submit. So you can see interest equals music, interest equals reading. All right, so I select it too. Just kind of showing you how this is, you know, and I know I've done this back a while back ago when we were doing HTML stuff. But for checkboxes, it's going to set, you know, interest. So basically, when you read this, it's going to be kind of an array of things. You're going to read, interest is going to be multiple things, right? Music, reading, etc. If you do a radio buttons and you do radio buttons, you're only sending one thing, right? But for checkboxes, you can be sending multiple values for the same field, right? So just kind of want to point that out. Okay, formatting numeric values. So when working with prices, quantities, and calculations, proper formatting is essential. Round, rounding, so round numbers to a specific number of decimal places and returns a string, right? So just showing you how to do, for 2 decimal places, you do 2 fixed like that. And here's examples with rounding here. So basically 2 fixed with 0, it's going to be a 6, right? It's going to basically round this up. If you do a 1, it's going to round up this number, right? It'll return 5.7. If you do 2, it's going to round up this number to an 8, which is right here. If you do 3, it's going to round up this number to a 9. Okay? Talk about local string a little bit. So basically, for United States, if you especially for currencies and stuff, it's kind of best practices to set to a local string. A lot of websites or international websites, not all only for the United States and not for English speaking. So are places where they have different currencies than the U.S. currency, right? The dollar. So this is a way to set the currency, and you can set the currency on your web page. And then I might want to display things in different currencies, right? And this is how you would do that. Form elements, form events. So forms generate various events that you can respond to with JavaScript. Submit, you do a submit and you can catch that submit. You can have something filled out. They click that submit button. You kind of can pause it. You can do a bunch of validating before you send that forward, right? So that's where it's good to catch those things. On change, so there's also an on change event where you change a value in a text box. When that gets changed, you can do a validation on changing, or you can update a calculation. That's a good thing to do with there, where you might have like an order form where you're selecting things, and based on the things you select, they all have a number, and then you keep updating on change of different things that you selected. It will change the total, right? Maybe the price total. Input. Values change immediately. Real-time validation. Focus. Field gaze focus. We already looked at focusing and blurring. All right, let's look at a few of these. Okay, so in the code, we got some different events here. We've got an input event. Okay, and this was basically going to count the character count. It's going to do a character count on everything that's entered. And we're doing an add event listener. So we're doing an add event listener on each one of these. This one's an input field, an input event. This is a change event. Okay. And an input event fires on every character. That's what this is basically going to do. Okay. Change event is going to fire when a field loses focus if the value changes, right? Once something changes, it's going to go ahead and trigger this one. And this one would be trigger on submit, right? Once you submit it. And it's very common to do what's called event.prevent default. And this stops the form from being actually submitted. When you hit a submit button, it's actually going to be submitted, right? Unless you stop it. So a lot of times you're going to stop it, and then you may do some validations or do some things, and then you're going to go ahead and, after that, allow it to be submitted, right? But this is how you prevent the form from actually being submitted. So let's go ahead and look at just a little bit of code here, some differences. So this one here, let me refresh this. Some real-time characters. So this is that input form event. Okay. And as you can see, every time I add something, it's being logged, right? Here is a change event. This fires on blur, right? So I'm putting numbers, I put numbers in here, and then I'm clicking out of this field, right? It currently has focus. Once I click out of this field, it's going to change down here, okay? So that is on change event, okay, as opposed to the input event. And then down here we have a submit event. I don't think this is part of this though, actually. No, we don't really have no, we have a submit here. So this submit form, sorry, this submit form is basically going to be your submit event. And this is going to form would be submitted here, but it doesn't, the form submission is prevented, right? We're using that prevent to prevent that submit that we just looked at. So that's going to prevent that from being submitted. So three different form events there. So here is some HTML validation and custom messages, all right? Let's go ahead and look at that code real quick. So here we're doing some, on the first one we have a username, the first field is username, and we're doing a required with a min length of 3, right? For email, we're doing just required. For the password, we're doing required with a min length of 8. And then for this age one, we're just doing required. And we are using a min and max here. Okay, a min and a max. Okay, and then let's look at our JavaScript for this. So we're kind of using event listeners for focus and blur. And based on that, we're actually doing changing the class list, right? So basically changing the classes, the CSS classes, so you can turn it red color or whatever. You can do all kinds of different things with that. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about regular expressions for validation. So regular expressions, also called regex, are patterns used to match text. They're powerful for validation. You can do things like check for a phone number here. So basically all your, there's a few different ways to do this, but all your things are going to kind of start like this. And so basically this is saying, this is starting from the beginning here, right? You have to do these backslashes and stuff like that, kind of for purposes of escape characters. But here you're basically saying the validation for this is basically 3 digits, D for digits. You got 3 digits, a dash, 3 more digits, a dash, and then 4 digits, right? And this goes all the way, this means to the end of the field, right? To the end of that text string that you have, right? You're going to see that on each one of these, to the end of the text string that you have, right? Because you might do it's possible to do validation within a whole large group of string, and you're just looking for certain things that have to be there. But in a lot of cases, especially for forms, you're putting in some certain numbers, and you want to validate that whole line of that whole string, right? So that's what that does all the way to the end of the string. So this is for phone number, right? This is just checking for a zip code, right? Basically just checking you got 5 digits, right? This is checking that you've got what you do in here. Saying you want 2 uppercase letters, which here you got A, B, okay? And then 5 digits, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? So whenever you see numbers like this in there, it's saying how many of something you can do, right? So here you could do 3 digits, 4 digits for the phone number. Here, 5 digits for the zip code. Here, you're saying you can use 2 uppercase letters. If these were a lowercase a and a lowercase z, that would be lowercase letters, right? But it's saying you can, and so if you don't have 2 uppercase letters, it's not going to pass the validation, right? And if you don't have 5 digits, right? So that's what this is saying. Give me 2 uppercase letters and 5 digits. Anything between A and Z. Okay. This here, you don't see any numbers here or anything like that. So this is just basically saying that everything here, you could have 5 characters in this field, or you could have 500 characters. Everything needs to be only letters. You can't put any digits in there. If you have a number in there, it's going to fail validation. Letters only, right? Here is saying only digits. Only digits all the way to the end, right? So only numbers. If you try to put a letter in there, it should fail validation, okay? A lot of times what's kind of common is, stating, kind of keeping them in one place, but not necessarily. But I've seen different things done different ways. But so basically, here saying a phone pattern that we just kind of got from up here, right? And then what you do is you take your phone pattern, right, and then you do a dot test, and you pass in a phone number. In this case, it just has this, but this could be an input field that's from your page, right? If this could be an input field from your page, input value field, right? Not just the field, the value of that field. Then you could test that, and it'll tell you if it's valid or not. And this is just logging this out to see valid or not valid. Here's validating a phone number. Let's see, what's different here? Function uses regex. Okay, well, it's just showing you within a function. So having a validate phone, common to have different functions for each validation. Validate phone number, validate zip code, etc. Having a separate function for that. Here's your pattern, same thing we're kind of looking at earlier. And then doing this test. So this is basically your pattern. Phone is whatever you're passing in here. Usually this is going to be a value of an input field, right? And then you could be returning some text. Phone must be in this format. Else return empty, being valid. You're going to check if it's empty. Empty string, it's good. If it's not, or you could be returning a true here or something. Usually when you return you don't really want to do that. If you're going to be returning a string, in this case you're returning a string, you also really want to return a string also. You wouldn't want to return a true or false here. I wasn't really thinking here. But because, it's going to return one or the other, so you need to be checking. And if so, you're returning you always want to kind of return the same thing. So in this case, you're returning a string if it's not valid. If it is valid, you're just returning an empty string, and so you'll just check for that, right? Here is showing a password. So you're just showing a ways to do more than just your regular expression, your regex. It's also checking some other things. First, it's checking. So you're passing in a password. So basically getting this from an input field, passing in the value. You're saying, is this length less than 8? If it isn't, then you need to send back this. Then you're going and checking if the password must contain an uppercase letter, right? So here you're kind of doing this all in multiple kind of multiple if statements. Here you're checking to make sure you got at least one uppercase letter, or must contain lowercase letter. Yeah. has at least one uppercase letter, here at least one lowercase letter. Here basically must contain a number, right? So if if it goes through all of this, right, then it's going to return this if it's valid. Otherwise, it would return one of these, right? Let's look at this field here. This is just doing a basic validation here, just like we were looking at. So phone's valid. You know, you get rid of one of these, you put in a letter. You know, it's going to be invalid. You know, pretty basics. Just using this validation regex expression. Same thing here. Pretty straightforward there. Let's talk about this credit card validation. This is called Lewin algorithm. Okay. And so here it's kind of doing a credit card number validation. And let me find that. I had something for that. Let me grab that. Okay. So this Lewin algorithm, also known as Lewin formula, is a simple checksum formula used to validate identification numbers. It was developed by Peter Lewin at IBM and can be used to validate credit card numbers and other mobile equipment identity numbers and other numeric data as well. Very common for credit card numbers, though. Okay. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm going to kind of show you how this looks a little bit. So we're going to illustrate how this works with this number here. So what you're going to do is you're going to take, you're going to double every second digit from the right. So the first number from the 3, you're not doing anything with. And here we're going to kind of add, we're going to see how we just going to add it down here. So we do, like it said, every second digit. So the first one, we're not doing anything with it. And so we just drop it there. Okay. The next one is a 1. So what we're going to do here is we're going to double this. So 1 times 2 equals 2. That's that 1 here. And we're going to take that. We're going to drop that down here. Okay. The next one is a 7. That's not every second digit. So we're going to just drop that down here. So that's right here. Then the next one over here, an 8. And since this is an 8, this is a second digit, right? The next second digit. And so here, the way you do this is you're going to take 8 times 2 equals 16, right? And then what you're going to do, instead of, you know, this is kind of just a strange little algorithm that might not make a lot of sense to you, but this actually does work. You're going to take your 16, and instead of using the number 16, you're going to add 1 plus 6. 1 plus 6 equals 7. Now you're going to drop that one down here. Okay. The next one over is a 9. You're just going to go ahead and drop that down here. All right. And then the next one over is a 3. You're going to do 3 times 2 is a 6. You're going to drop this one down here. All right. And then after that, we are, which one were we at? 3. And the next one over there is a 7. We're just going to drop that down here. Then the next one over is one of the second digits over. So we're going to do 2 times 2 is a 4. Okay. And we're going to put that here. All right. And then the next one over from that is a 9. We're going to drop that one down. Then the next 9, we're going to take 9 times 2 is 18, right? And instead of using 18, we're going to do 1 plus 8 equals 9, and we're going to drop that down here. And then the very first digit is a 7, okay? And then we're going to add that all up, and that's 70. And according to this algorithm, because the result is 70, well, since it's a multiple of 10, it's going to be valid, right? If this would have been a 71, a 75, or whatever, it would not be a multiple of 10, it'd be invalid. And since it's a It's a multiple of 10, which is, 70 is a multiple of 10. This is according to the Lewin algorithm. This will validate to true. Okay. Very interesting. And it kind of seems a little strange maybe to you. I'll go ahead and give you a link to some more information on this just for your own personal, knowledge. But kind of an interesting little thing. It's used to validate credit card numbers. Very interesting, huh? Let me look at that code. So we won't actually do this. You don't have to worry about this. And actually, I'm sure there's some JavaScript libraries that actually take care of this for you. But this is what this is doing here. You're taking this credit card number. You're just doing some validations, making sure it's all digits here, and then you're doing this loop, which is kind of complex here. Based on this loop, you're taking every second digit, multiplying it by two, right? Um, and when you get done, you're basically seeing if the sum you're using modulus, our good old modulus we've been using here and there. And so if it's divisible by 10, then if it equals 0, right? It's divisible 10, then it's valid, right? So yeah, we won't go through all of this. I don't want to confuse you with that, but just letting you know that this is an option for credit card validation and just kind of an interesting concept, this Lewin algorithm. All right. Let's see. Talk about a little best practices. Always validate on both the client and the server. And that's because sometimes things can make it past the client and get to the server. And the reason for validation is more than just for purposes of making sure that the user enters all the data. There are ways for malware, ways for hackers to get into the backend server through some techniques. And so by validating your data, that helps prevent that, right? So it's good for basically for the user experience, but for data security as well, right? Um, Provide clear and helpful error messages. Just don't say this is invalid data or whatever. Give a specific helpful reason. Passwords must be 8 characters long, etc. Right? This is showing you by using this input event. This is basically validating real time when possible. As you enter data, it's validating it automatically. You use those HTML validation attributes. They're required. You got the min, the max, and the required, right? Disable submit buttons while form is invalid. So we do that, the prevent, prevent default from submitting the form. That's always good practice. On submit, you should have a JavaScript function that's tied to that submit form, that submit button, so that you prevent that. Do some validations before you submit that form, right? Focus. Put focus in that first field. Focus on the first invalid field. So basically, it's saying when you have a submit button, you click the submit button, does a validation. When it's done doing its validation, go ahead and put focus in that first field. Sometimes you could have 20 different things on a form. You want to kind of put that when you hit that submit button, if there's an error, you want to kind of go to where that first error was, right? So you want to put focus in that field using the dot focus, open and close parentheses, right? We looked at. Use the proper input types. There are, not everything's text. A long time ago, traditionally years ago, that's before there was other input types available. Everything was text, input type text, and then you just kind of had to validate for emails and things like that. But now you have emails, you have password, you have numbers, you have for telephone. So there's these different input types that are available. So try to use them. And it's saying test with edge cases. Things that are not always, um, think, those little things that you don't think about sometimes, to test for those harder type situations, the things that you don't think about, called edge cases, right? Here's a form cheat sheet, how to access a form, how to get the value from a field, how to get the value from the selected index of like options for a select. Radio button, here's how to get the value of that checked radio button, the simple way, or otherwise you can use a for statement to loop through. For a checkbox, this is how you get the one that's checked. Format currency, good practice to set the local string if you're using US, or you may be displaying different currencies for different languages on your page as well. Different events, use like these add event listeners. So you can, on your form, you can add an event listener. Submit form. Now, obviously, if you do it like that, that's going to be whatever you called as your form, right? You have to make sure it's the correct ID and so forth, right? But add event listener. So here's a submit, and it's handler. It's just telling you, this would be something that you would call some function or whatever, right? Based on this, right? Here's on change. Validation. We didn't really look at this much, but there's also this check validity, and you can set a custom validity. We did look at some patterns and doing a test on those patterns. Basically, you have the pattern that you created, right, that you defined. Then use this test function. This is the value. So this can be the value of what's from your input field, right? And here's the focus and blur. So forms are the primary way users input data. Reference forms through document.forms or get element by ID. Your selection list need selected index to get the values. So you need your selected index to get the correct value. Use query selector for radio buttons. Okay, makes things easier. We were kind of just looking at that. Format numbers with 2 fixed and 2 local string. Respond to events. Submit, change, input, focus, blur. Use those built-in validation attributes from HTML5 that's already there for you. And this is that constraint. We didn't really look at this. So the constraint validation API. I'll send you some links on this though. Regular expressions to test patterns with the .test. And always validate both on the client and on the server. Okay, we're not doing server on this, we're client side, but you will be learning how to also validate on the server later on in this application web development program. Okay, one more thing I'm going to go through here. I think I'm just going to go through some of the review questions. So let me pull those up. Okay. So for this chapter 6, review questions. Objects representing each of the controls in a form or stored in the what kind of collection? And so if you recall, when you have a form, you may have some div tags, a paragraph tags. You could have different things within your form than just the within the controls themselves. You may have some other things, but them are not considered part of that form, okay? But they are not form controls. The form controls are basically called elements, right? Shouldn't call them controls here. I should be careful, but it's elements collection, right? Elements collection. So all the different controls are called elements, all right? The elements collection. To reference elements from the first and only form in a web page with the name user form, which of the following expressions should you not apply? Obviously always remember the not, right? So this is one way to access the form. This is another way. And that very first form, you can get that by doing document.forms with the 0 subscript, right? That's the first one. This here is going to give you the second one. So this is the one that should not apply, right? All these other ones are other ways to get that form, right? Well, I don't really like how they're doing this here, but that's okay. That's kind of their what they're meaning here is this is not going to get you that first form, okay? Because it's subscript 0 for the first form. Which value of a selected index property of a select object corresponds to no selection? Okay, and so we looked at this already, right? So for the selected index, if it hasn't been selected, it's going to return a -1. Okay, it's going to return a -1, and that's because the indexes, just like we've, you know, learned with arrays and everything else, everything's zero based, so it's not going to be a zero, right? A zero is going to be the first item, right? One's going to be your second item, right? It doesn't return false. It doesn't return Booleans. It's going to return a number, and it's going to return a -1 if nothing's been selected. To remove the focus from a form element, apply which of the following methods, right? Well, that one gives you the focus. This isn't relevant. Stuff's not relevant. And the one for removing focus is the on blur event. So that would be D here. Which method do you apply to a selection list to add a new option to the list? This is something we did not look at. But the way to do that is use add, and in a way, process elimination. You get pretty close there. You know, it's probably not right. It just doesn't seem strange. Append adds something like a string to a string. It's not going to create a new option type thing, right? So you've got insert or add. You know, you're down to those two, but the correct answer is add. Okay. To reference the text associated with an option button, use which one of the following HTML collections? Okay. So 6, what we use for that is we don't use options, we don't use elements. Actually, we use labels. Which one of the following reference the text associated with an option button? I'm sorry, it's actually options. So you do options.text, right? Text of options to get the, to reference the text associated. Yeah, you do options.text. To display a numeric value to 3 decimal places, which method should you apply? So we looked at that. So we use the toFixed. They're available for you. The toFixed for rounding. Okay. There are some other options that we'll look at later on in this course where you can do. There's the math object where you can do some a little more advanced stuff. But for the most part, if you want to display the numeric value at 3 decimal places, you take your value and you do a toFixed of a 3 on that. To display a currency value based on local standards, with method should you use? You use the locale string here, toLocale string, right? When a submit button is clicked in a form, which of the following actions occur first on a submit button? Let's see here. Well, yeah. So basically, if you have some validations on your form, especially using the HTML built-in validations, those field validations will be validated, right? Yeah, those field validations will be validated. Now, if you have some custom stuff, that's a little different, but the field values will be validated prior to the event being fired, the submit event being fired. All right. Number 10, if a field contains a value that does not match its data type, which value of the validity object returns a value of true? We really haven't gone through this much. I apologize. So probably should have went through this a little more. But the answer to this one is type mismatch, validity type mismatch. If you put if the wrong data type is out in there. To test whether a field value is valid, which method should apply, and that will be check validity. Okay, check validity. One more in that area. To display a customized error message for invalid data, which method should you use? And for that, you use the set custom validity. To reference the source of an event, where event is the event's object variable, what do you use? And what you use is event.target, okay? To reference a source of an event where the event is the object variable used, yes. So you can determine, so you can determine which form element reported the invalid data by using event.target property, where the event is the name and the event object variable, okay? Number 14, which method to use to disable the default behavior for an event? And that's A, prevent default, right? So when you hit that submit button, whatever, and that's not only the submit button, there's other events as well. If you want to disable that default behavior because you're wanting to do some other things, right? They hit submit. No, you don't want that form submitted right away. You want to do some other validations. You may be different things you want to do, right? You may well ask them some questions. Are you sure you want to submit? All those things. So, you want to prevent that default functionality from, then you want to do maybe some custom things, then you want to go ahead and submit it, right? So you would hit prevent default. To override the native browser tools for managing form validation, which statements do you apply? And this is number 15 here. And so for this one here, what you would use is the form no validate equals true. Okay. And that will, that's using the native, that's, to make sure that you don't validate based on the native browser validation tools, right? When you use required and all those different things. Okay, well, describe how to retrieve the value of a field that is entered using a selection list. So you use basically the selected index property, determine which options within the selection list was selected, right? And then you would apply the value property to get that selected item, right? To get the value of that selected item. So you must apply the selected index property, right? 17, under what circumstances would you use a local string method? Locale string methods, used in a situation where, different kinds of readable format of such as a currency format, right? It's all about currency, right? Why would you use the hidden fields within a web form? We really didn't talk about hidden fields too much. There might be some certain data that you can do a hidden field. When they say hidden, it's really not hidden. It's hidden from the user. You don't see it. But if you looked at the HTML, you're going to still see that data. But there's some certain things. If you're maybe like if you've got a page where you've got a multiple pages and you've got like arrows to go to the second, third page of data, usually that's a good use for hidden fields. So first page 1, page 2, page 3, stuff that the user doesn't necessarily have to see, but it's used when you contact the back end because you're saying, give me the next page. I'm currently on page 3. Give me page 4. Things like that, right? So that's called a hidden field. And always remember that a hidden field is only hidden on basically from the user's view. But if you look at the source of the HTML page, you're going to see that hidden field in there, right? 19, if your code submits a form using the expression form.submit, what will happen with the browser's native validation tools? And basically, the native validation tools will not run by the browser, okay? So that's a common mistake, is to assume that the method is equivalent to clicking the submit button. It is not, okay? The key differences is that the submit event is not triggered, so any event listeners or event handlers associated with that submit event will not be accessed, and the native browser validation tools, which are part of the constraint validation API, will be bypassed. Number 20, when you choose not to use the native browser validation tools for validating a web form, when would you choose? Well, basically, when you need to support older browsers or things like that, or you want to supply only your own validation, right? So I would say probably the biggest case is when you want your own custom validation rules, your own custom validations, and you don't want to support the native browser stuff that's automatically in the HTML. That's when you would bypass that. So, okay, that's all I have. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll send you some references and some links on some of the different things that we've talked about here today. Okay, have a good one.